One more look at before and after. That's what we're after. All right, so today is the day that we finally get around to polishing the weigh tubes from that classic 10ER Shopsmith. They've already been through the evaporust and are looking pretty clean, but they're not very well polished. And so that's the next step. The problem we have with this is how to polish them. I think the ideal way would be to spin these. And because my lathe isn't long enough to turn this between two centers, I'm gonna have to resort to a different approach. And part of that approach is going to involve, number one, gripping it here on the end of our spindle, and then supporting it without a tailstock. And that's going to require a couple special things. Now, the first thing that I'm going to need for this is something that will either grip this tube from the outside or from the inside. Now, you could use a lathe chuck if you happen to have a lathe chuck, and those could grip this either way. Let me show you something. One of the problems I have here is when they cut this off, they created quite a burr. So it's got a pretty good lip on the inside. This side seems to have been cut a bit cleaner. So that's going to be the end I'm going to use. And the way that I'm going to grip this is from the inside with something far less expensive than a lathe chuck. And that is something called a freezer plug. These are used in the automotive industry, and you can pick these up online or just go into your local AutoZone, and they have these in a couple different sizes. The size we need for the 10ER weigh tubes is the 1-inch size, and we do have to make a little modification to this inexpensive part. Now, the way that these little freezer plugs work is you've got essentially a carriage bolt that's captured on one side, a rubber washer that will expand when you tighten the nut on the opposite side. Of course, I grabbed the wrong wrench. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to be using this nut. What I'm going to do is take this nut off. So what I'm going to use here as a replacement is this coupling nut. I think I called this a union nut in a recent video. These are used to join together lengths of threaded rod and can be used in other places as well, like this. And the most important thing is that you get the proper thread, which might be why someone you know bought a thread checking tool. This is going to go down then inside the ID of this, and then we tighten. Now, this is where things may not go quite as simple as I would like, because there's really nothing to prevent this from spinning inside the tube until that rubber begins to get some grip. What I had hoped that that bolt was long enough that I could leave the original nut and then add the union nut to it, because that way it would act as a jam nut, locking the two together, and I would be able to tighten it first with the small nut and then add the union nut. Things don't work out that well for me. Now we're already starting to expand. What can I do to hold this? I'm just curious if I can get anywhere doing this. Clamp that down. And if it would be possible, just need to keep that washer from spinning long enough to where it gets a good grip. Once it begins to seat, it shouldn't spin. Okay, yep, I think we're getting there. It's really not critical, you know, if it does slip in there, it's not the end of the world. As long as this doesn't come out of the tube while we're turning it. All right, hey, that worked. We found a way. All right, so next in order to hold this thing out in space without a tailstock, I'm going to attach my steady rest. Now, my steady rest was built quite a number of years ago using plywood, some pieces of aluminum extrusion from various Shopsmith components, some T-nuts that are captured here, and then some wheels from inline roller skate. And this has gotten me to think that I probably need to show you some alternatives to this approach, because you may not have this or the time to produce this. So for sure, we will be doing a follow-up to this video, and I'm going to show you some alternatives if you don't have a steady rest. But this is going to go down here. And one thing I have to think about is, because when I made this, I didn't use, when I made this, I didn't use bolts that were long enough to add nuts on the back. So I'm relying 100% on the aluminum threads that I cut in here. So I have to think about which way are these going to rotate where they're not going to unwind. And that is spinning in this direction, which means I need to face this way. If I face it the opposite direction, it'll unscrew those bolts. And then I need to adjust these to fit the size of my weigh tubes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive this with my keyless chuck. Thinking about you, Chad. And we'll attach this. But before we try mounting our weigh tubes, I'm going to use a Forstner bit that I've got that is the same size, roughly the same size as the ID of my weigh tubes. And I'm just going to chuck that up, make sure it's running true, which it is. And I've got, just because I know I'm liable to do something stupid in this operation, I've got a kill switch installed in case I need to stop things suddenly. So not only is it off, the headstock is off as well, so I'm not going to have any surprises. Well, then back off the wheels here. We'll bring the headstock forward, and then to do this, I do want to make sure my headstock is locked, because when it's unlocked, it's in a slightly different position than when it is locked. And now I can bring my quill forward, and then bring the wheels out to meet that. I don't need to apply a bunch of pressure here, and I'll explain why in just a bit. All right, all that positioned properly. Let me get the headstock back, and I'll make sure these are all snug. Now, why I said that it's not critical that this be tight on the tube is really, it could be floating or resting on just two of these tubes if we wanted to. It's not going to go anywhere. In fact, if I back this off, we can prove that point. It's a matter of safety and maybe paranoia. I'll bring all three of those into position, but for now, that's all that we need. So we'll bring the headstock back so we have as much access to this as we can. Now, a number of years ago, I made a bed extension for some turnings I needed to do that were just a little bit longer than the standard bed length, but this one's quite a bit longer. So that leads me to think that the steady rest is the proper tool for this. But let's check this out. Start by turning it by hand, see if there are any surprises. Make sure our tube's not bent, for example. And that looks good. And then we'll go ahead now and drop the top wheel down. Now, I've seen people that have done this with just two rollers, and it would work. but I got 3, might as well use them. So I changed my mind. I don't want to use my keyless chuck here because I can't see the jaws with it chucked all the way up on this shoulder. And so I am going to swap this out for a Shopsmith keyed chuck, which I think will give me a little better view of what's going on. That was making me a little nervous. So we'll start that process over. Feed this back through. Yeah, I still can't really see the jaws on this. Interesting. Thought for sure I would be able to. And let's see if this will spin true. Yeah, it's not quite true. So what can we do about this? Well, I'm going to show you a trick that you might not believe. I'm not recommending this, but this is something that we used to do in the clockmaking world. And if you had something that wasn't spinning true, sometimes you could give it a little knock. So let me see. Yeah, that did it. It's the fit between the rubber and the burr on the end of this. So I will say, if you have a lathe chuck that can grip this diameter, or even in from the inside, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just going at this with a solution that costs about $7, something like that. But now we're moving and spinning true enough that we can polish this. I just need to keep an eye on this to make sure it doesn't get any rougher as we go. Now with this, we would typically use some kind of a microfiber. I am not going to put my hand inside of this pad. It is designed for that, but you know, that's for waxing your car. We'll apply this here. And again, this has an abrasive effect to it. I'm still seeing quite a bit of pitting from the rusting here. And so I think it's time to go back to a coarser abrasive. In this case, we will use the technique of using a Scotch-Brite type of bonded abrasive, and as a lubricant, some WD-40. I think we'll come back to this polish after we've removed all the little imperfections. I do have a couple different WD-40s here in the shop. This is just the standard WD-40. I don't want to use the stuff that's designed for loosening rusted parts. Just a little bit too caustic for this application. But we'll get this lubricated and then give this abrasive a try. That's the stuff. Yeah, that's looking much better. Let's get rid of some of that residue. And now we could go on to polish this a little bit better. We've gotten rid of the bulk of the scratches. I do see some imperfections here from where the set screws were holding on to the, I guess it must be the base end on the tailstock end. And there's no reason to try to get all the way down through that because it's going to be hidden. And to get down through it, I'd have to remove everything above it. So I'm not really worried about that. But we'll continue on with this approach and get this whole thing polished up. Now, in order to get this area done, I will need to move this forward and get the part that's currently rolling on the wheels. I'm also smelling something, and I'm hoping it's not my my old wheels here. I have replacements for them already just in case they need it, because these are probably 30 years old. Wouldn't surprise me. But so far, they're working. A little bit of a defect right here. The headstock was frozen on these tubes, as you recall. And so I've got some pitting from where either the headstock or the carriage was resting. So same situation there. I'm not going to be able to get that entirely gone, but I'm going to go ahead and work it a little bit more. Come on forward. And get this last bit done. Quite a bit more wobble with that extended like that. All right, now let's try the mother's polish on it. Wow. Okay, let's compare our before and after here. That's much more better. Quite a bit more. This had to be where the headstock was. There's so many pits here. The only way to get rid of these pits would be to go back into a coarser grit and do some more grinding, which I just don't think is necessary here. I think it's going to be fine for considering where this thing has come. I think it's going to be fine. But I do need to get this thing polished to the point where I can put a nice paste wax on it and not have to worry about it. I think I'm going to hit this with some mineral spirits, and then we'll go ahead and get some paste wax applied to it. All right. Hit this with some mineral spirits. Get the last of that residue off of there, and then we'll go ahead and get some paste wax on here. Residue. If that doesn't melt those tires, I don't know what will. All right, we'll let that dry for maybe 10 minutes and buff off the excess. You know what, while I'm at it, I might as well go ahead and do that middle section. At some point or another, this has to be running on wax, so might as well be now. Whoa, a little close. Now we wait 10 minutes. Whatever will we do for 10 minutes? All right, so that's been about 10 minutes. And just like that, we're done with one. So I think I'm going to leave the second one to the next video where, again, in a follow-up, I'm going to show you another idea if you don't happen to have a steady rest. And I think we'll also talk about the bouncing that we were getting. We'll see if you can guess what the cause of that was, and we'll address that when we meet again for the follow-up. All right, in the meantime, make it a great day.